Hello everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be discussing the philosophy of Loki Season 1. It has become one of my favorite shows of pretty much the entire MCU. I think this is number one. It's the one that I recommend the most to people. And it has a really engaging plotline. It has great pacing. The set designs and the props are unmatched by a mile by any other Marvel show, including WandaVision in my opinion, even though that show had some pretty good set designs as well. The performances from Tom Hiddleston, Sophia DiMartino, and of course Owen Wilson are some of the best acting that we've got in the MCU, period. And I really think that exploring the journey of this character and his emotional setbacks, but also the way that he was able to get back up and pretty much redefine his entire story is something that I think is well worth exploring. Just to kind of give an overview of some of the themes that we'll be discussing, that I have picked up on throughout watching the show. Free will, defying fate, purpose, glorious, of course, identity, ego death / transition into selflessness, confronting the shadow, how stories / mythology can shape our own personal experiences, confronting the unknown, and time. Now, it's important to note, this is a variant of the main timeline Loki. This is not like the main one that has appeared in the MCU up until Infinity War, where he gets killed by Thanos. After Loki steals the Tesseract, he is teleported to a completely different place in space and time. But then, shortly after, he is captured by the TVA, a force so overwhelmingly more powerful than himself or anything he's ever encountered up until this point. And we see him essentially go through the 5 stages of grief accepting this. He tries everything. He tries to fight them directly. He tries to use magic, cunning, then bargaining. After all those options have been exhausted, Loki is vulnerable to criticism and actually able to self-reflect and internalize the situation and really see what's going on around him now. After getting an opportunity to view the future of the main timeline variant, our Loki suddenly has an epiphany. He decides to cooperate. Loki is a narcissist, though, and we are constantly reminded of this through his arrogance, selfishness, among other traits. It's only after a life-changing, potentially traumatic event that he's able to consider changing his ways. And he knows that there's pretty much nothing in his power that he can do. And if he doesn't cooperate, he will be pruned into non-existence. At least that's what he believes at this point. Despite Loki being a literal god, watching himself die in the manner that he did, once again trying to deceive someone, truly struck real fear into him. Also, watching how his actions led to the death of his adoptive mother was a real wake-up call for him. I feel like the reason why he cooperates now is because what he just experienced challenges every expectation he had for himself. We hear the phrase glorious purpose being used by Loki quite often, and it expresses his desire for power, leaving a legacy, and the divine reasoning behind every action. He's acted this way his entire life. So after Loki agrees to finally help, he is enlisted to track down a variant of himself, who we later learn to be Sylvie. When meeting Sylvie for the first time, we see Loki start to fall back into his old ways. In many ways, Loki envies Sylvie's freedom and even begins to admire her. But he also gets very annoyed with her during their first encounter, as he even mentions himself. He's like, is this what it's like to deal with me? Like, now I know how Thor feels all the time. And this is just another general theme of the show of looking back in the past and seeing past mistakes and trying to atone for them as best as possible. There's another scene where he's put into a time loop prison of sorts of a really bad memory, and even there we see him try to plead and reason and try to change what happens, but in the end, it's a time loop, and what happens, and he also learns that the hard way. Through Sylvie, Loki is actually starting to feel something he's always repelled in his life: genuine connection. Even people as close to him as Thor or Odin have been victim to Loki's various schemes, and he took pleasure in it. Only when it's a variant of himself is he able to truly see how he treats other people. He tries to care for her, but she pushes him away consistently. The Love is a Dagger scene really illustrates Loki's experiences with love and how he views his relationship with Sylvie. When the two do finally find some common ground and start expressing gratitude or even affection towards one another, we see Loki's heart open for the first time. Sylvie being just as confused as what to do in these moments as well. This completely breaks time, aka the TVA did not account for this. This is another example of changing the path that was laid out for Loki by his family, by his surroundings, by his environment. He is actively defying the path that was laid out for him. With the knowledge he gained at the TVA of the future, and his present understanding of the circumstances that surround him, knowing Sylvie's on a warpath ready to burn down the TVA and kill anyone in her path, maybe even Loki, Loki is in metamorphosis. He's actively changing his identity, therefore more open to ideas that challenge his beliefs, as he's had nearly every one of them shattered during the course of the show. Sylvie will not budge on what her mission is, but that conflict doesn't steam up until the finale. The next aspect of the show I want to get into is the whole confrontation of the shadow. Psychologist Carl Jung has a concept of the shadow, where it's all the repressed parts of your personality in which you don't want to confront or are either repressed due to other reasons. I believe that the other variants Loki meets in the Void, as well as Sylvie, are all representations of parts of his own personality that he doesn't really want to confront, or perhaps parts of himself that he's imagined in some way or another, idealized or romanticized or what. But now he has the chance to actively confront them and maybe even battle with them, just like in the case with President Loki. But the three variants that he mostly interacts with are the most important. Before Loki can become actualized, he needs to confront his shadow and get those aspects of himself up to the surface so that they don't come out in other ways that can interject with his true purpose as how he sees it. The Loki who is carrying a sort of junkyard version of Mjolnir is the Loki that is very boastful, very prideful, essentially wants to take Thor's place and idealizes him very much, and is the embodiment of masculinity, in my opinion, when it comes to how to be as expected by your environment and upbringing. The older Loki, the more classic costume one, has been in isolation for a very, very long time, and that's why he ended up breaking time, or, went against the TVA, because that isolation granted him insane self-knowledge and worth of self, pretty much, and he was able to perform incredible feats of magic that nobody had ever accounted for in that timeline. He, however, remained isolated for that entire time and never interacted with anyone else up until the TVA showed up. And Kid Loki is rather interesting because he's the one that killed his brother Thor. I believe this represents the most cunning and most Lokiest Loki, for the lack of a better term, as expected by everyone who hears about him or thinks about him in that way, taking every opportunity he can to place himself above other people, including his family. And these are just generalizations, as I'm not really focusing on those characters themselves, rather how they reflect what our Loki is going through in terms of changing identity and confronting his shadow self. It's also important to note that each of these shadow variants, we'll call them, are at different stages of their life, at least physically. We have a kid, we have the Thor variant, who's probably, I want to say, mid-30s or 40s, and then the older variant, who's on the older side of age. Those are all, again, representations of different stages of Loki's life that he has seen himself in. And these variants are found in the Void, where Loki previously thought it was just nothing. You just kind of go into non-existence. But he sees, once you sort of go in, it is representations of yourself that you need to confront in order to leave. And once Loki and Sylvie do leave, they end up going to confront He Who Remains, or pretty much the all-knowing source of everything at the end of time. And this again brings in the questions of free will, fate, purpose, even legacy and identity, when confronted with the all-knowing source of everything, and he is providing that information to you in real time, what are you to do? Well, you use free will. When Loki and Sylvie confront He Who Remains runs out of knowledge, essentially, and they're at the end of time. So when talking about time in this context, they're not seeing it in a linear view. He sees it as sort of points on a DVD that you can rewind, pause, manipulate basically however you want. He Who Remains created the TVA in order to keep his ideal main timeline in order and to make sure that any variant timelines are pruned or wiped from existence. Essentially, trying to control free will by allowing fate to be defied here and there, only for it to be completely erased and matter for nothing. This is what Loki is terrified of, having his purpose just be for nothing, or his legacy amount to just it being erased at all. Whether he likes it or not, stories and mythology shaped his personal experience, especially when it comes to the context of seeing himself and his family as gods. Gods are the extreme embodiment of emotions and extreme actions or feats or personality traits that are deified in a certain way and personified. And Loki is actively going against all that by confronting what is the all-knowing source of everything at the end of time. But even then, he still tries to fight Sylvie and confront his shadow and, prevent this all-out calamity from repeating itself. Again, time showing itself to be a flat circle of constant prevention of this big war, at least in this context, across multiverses that will end everything. So he fails to stop Sylvie, and this is what brings us into Season 2. Now that we've discussed the more narrative and thematic elements of the show, I want to give some background into the settings and other entities that exist within the realm of Loki. And you can't talk about this show without talking about the dynamic between Mobius and Loki. Acting as an antagonist at first, he is essential in Loki's development. At first, he prods Loki with intrusive questions, and he's very cold in demeanor. But in time, they develop a buddy cop dynamic that is truly a joy to watch, especially the chemistry between Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston. Mobius serves as Loki's window into his own intentions and ambitions. By showing Loki everything his life amounts to and hitting him with an inescapable fate as was taught to Mobius by the TVA, it lights a fire under Loki to reflect his own current trajectory of life, his purpose. Mobius himself represses the idea of free will due to the proper flow of time. This mantra is etched into everyone who arrives at the TVA from branch timelines with memories wiped. Loki ends up challenging Mobius's beliefs time and time again to no avail, until Mobius sees the deception for himself. In Season 1, Episode 2, Mobius even says himself, "It's real because I believe it's real." Loki scoffs at this and responds to the Timekeeper dogma by saying, "No one bad is ever truly bad, and no one good is ever truly good." This hits so many narrative notes, not just within Loki's story, but in almost every character in well-written stories. There are faults in the good and virtues within the bad, and those moments can be chosen with, you guessed it, free will. His relationship with Ravonna is also something to note. They have been working together for what feels like eternity, although no specific amount of time is mentioned. Ravonna knows just a little bit more than Mobius, and that is the start of the descent of their relationship. Even when Mobius has the leverage of knowing more than she does, she insists on finding her own answers, leaving Mobius in the dust. And I'm sure there's a lot more here, but we're going to go back to Loki for now, and hop off of Mobius, even though he is a great character, great portrayal. Now, I do want to talk about the TVA briefly, because we do spend a lot of time there, and it is such a fascinating place. When Loki is shown the full scale of the TVA, potentially the full scale of the TVA, he says, "Is this the greatest power in the universe?" And Sylvie refers to them as omniscient fascists, and the TVA is quite the horrifying entity upon first discovery. They have the capability to trap you in a traumatic time loop for eternity. They have the capability to kidnap you, wipe your memories, and essentially turn you into a slave. They also replace those memories with the idea that the person was created by the TVA. Despite its omnipresent doom, The aesthetic is a mixture of brutalism and retrofuturism that goes so well into each other. The vibrant orange yellows on the walls and architecture contrasted with the dull brown, gray, and blacks of the TVA uniforms. It really is a treat to look at any given frame within the walls of the TVA. It's also run as a bureaucracy with the proper structure of workers, manager-type personnel, bosses, and then the timekeepers / he who remains. Although it all seems very convincing, it was built on lies. He who remains is arguably the most dangerous threat since Thanos, who has complete control over time itself and the free will of every living being under his thumb. He claims to do this out of security, since if he let timelines branch out, one of his variants will eventually come for his throne, causing an all-out multiversal war. We find out the true meaning behind his name, since he knows exactly what is going to happen every step of the way, as we will see more in Season 2, but even at the Citadel at the end of time, at the finale of Season 1, it is clear this man has achieved godlike status himself. He basically explains to Loki and Sylvie how he arrived to this point, and he has complete and total mastery over time itself. He has the ability to pause time. He can predict every move, since it's not really predicting, since he knows everything. Despite the drama surrounding Jonathan Majors, his performance in this role was captivating as hell. He just owned the screen anytime he was on it. His vocal inflections and his petty body language really sold the idea of someone who knows that he knows it all. The TVA is essentially just an extension of himself. He made it so that he doesn't have to directly manage these branch timelines and prune all these free will abusers. And as we see at the finale of Season 1, this man was right. He is truly he who remains. Now we're going to talk about a rather significant location in Loki called Lamentis. Lamentis is one of my favorite places in the MCU, not because it's pretty to look at or some massive battle happens with massive stakes. What happens between Loki and Sylvie on Lamentis and how it impacts their character development is the true pull of this location. The root word being lament, which means a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. In its Latin roots, it means to actively weep. It is also the style of poetry, expressing the same sentiment often with mythological and biblical backdrops. Lamentis is where one of, if not the worst possible apocalypse is happening. A planet is smashing into another planet that Loki and Sylvie happen to find themselves on. They also happen to find themselves out of a temp pad, leaving them with no escape from the current branch timeline on Lamentis. Oh, there was also a ship they tried to escape on called the Ark that gets destroyed. They have been going back and forth fighting up until this point with each other on nearly everything, pulling false truces and backstabs, yet they both have the same goal: overthrow the Timekeepers and reclaim their free will. And of course, Loki's glorious purpose. But this is the first time we see Loki and Sylvie drop their guards around each other. Sylvie asks Loki, "What makes a Loki a Loki?" And Loki responds, "Independence, authority, and style." From this response, we see Loki is still stuck in his arrogant, boastful self, even seeming amplified in Sylvie's presence, but also amplified is the playful, charming, and extroverted traits. They even end up bonding over family trauma. Oh, and we also get Tom Hiddleston singing in Asgardian. Like, that is serious devotion and love for his character. Also, this sets the scene for my favorite scene in Season 1, Love is a Dagger. After the Ark is destroyed at the end of that episode, the start of the next episode, we get a really intimate moment between Loki and Sylvie, where they are both truly vulnerable and honest with each other for the first time, since they are under the impression they are both about to die. Sylvie asks Loki, "Do you think what makes a Loki is the fact that we're destined to lose?" And Loki disagrees and says, "We may lose, but we never die. We survive." There's that fire for that self-change, that transmutation finally coming out and being honest with himself and, well, himself, but just from another timeline. This creates a very unique Nexus event by opening up to each other, which is a thing that no other Loki would even consider, let alone the entirety of the TVA. But yeah, great setting, great development for both characters. We really get to see a lot. It's like the midpoint in the season, so things are really starting to turn up in terms of like the stakes and finding out more about the TVA and about how Loki's attitude of change is manifesting. It's really great stuff. And before we wrap up here, I just need to glaze the soundtrack real quick, and the score, because those are two different things. The soundtrack is very well-picked, curated songs at the end of these episodes that just hit, especially Dark Moon, the end of Lamentus. That's a great song. But anyway, we get the incredible range of sounds from an orchestra, a choir, and a theremin, but it has this modern sheen over traditionally retro-sounding. Natalie Holt is the composer who also did great work on The Kenobi Show, I might mention. Tom Hiddleston ended up giving her a poetry book, T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, to help her convey the themes of time, the burden of wisdom, and purpose. She's also said in the same interview, it's an AMA on Reddit, by the way, that I think you really have to feel empathy and a oneness with the character to create the score. This is why this score in particular adds so much depth to the show, by using specific instruments such as more string-heavy elements with Loki's themes to convey the mythological aspect, and using the wily theremin and those pounding drums to convey the piercing, omnipresent threat of the TVA. Also, you can listen to the recorded track of Tom Hiddleston singing in Asgardian on your favorite streaming service, which I highly recommend you do. Loki is still my favorite thing Marvel has put out to this day. Sure, Endgame and Infinity War were incredible and everything an MCU fan could want, but in a post-Endgame era, where, let's all be honest here, the direction of the narrative aspect of most Marvel properties, with some exceptions like Moon Knight, Thunderbolts, and No Way Home, has dipped significantly, with more spectacle and no meaningful narrative stakes that drive our favorite characters forward with a sense of direction. Loki has come full circle in his journey, and I'll get more into that in a Season 2 video, but over the course of Season 1, we see him actively repenting and yearning to change his seemingly fixed destiny. The show is about taking agency over your life despite what others may think of you and what you have done in your past. Ultimately, you are the choice that acts upon the thoughts, emotions, impulses, desires, joys, and compassion, but you are not those things directly. Loki wants to change his destiny, and he makes the choice to do so after confronting different versions of himself and a power so unimaginably humbling that it forced reflection to the point of a full rebirth of his character.